Hello, hello. This is Justin Colletti of SonicScoop, and thanks for joining me for this week's episode of the SonicScoop podcast. If you're here for the live stream premiere, let me know if you can hear me and see me in the chat box over here. And today we're going to be looking at the best budget studio monitors out there. I have got a list of all of my top favorites pulled up. And just to let you know in advance, this is not going to be a quick 5-minute or 15-minute video because we're going to go extensive, we're going to go deep, we're going to compare all of them. But if you want the quick 5 or shorter than 15-minute version of this, we got an article version. You can read through it. It is linked in the description and the comments down below. If you want to go super deep, ask questions in real time via live chat, get answers in real time, and get all of my extensive tasting notes, the podcast video format is the format for that. So we are getting into it right now. A couple of quick things I've got to say is that we're living in a golden age of studio monitors. I'm just going to say that right now. The studio monitors you can get today for the price bracket we're looking at right now, which is $500 and under, they are better than they ever have been in my lifetime. I mean, the inflation-adjusted price of monitors, monitors would cost triple inflation-adjusted what they do today and not compare to what's available in inexpensive monitors today. But that said, there are some very popular, inexpensive budget studio monitors out there that I think are terrible and are going to lead you in the wrong direction. And they're usually not terrible for limitations in technology, but terrible for limitations in voicing, the way that these speakers are made to sound to make them stand out in stores and win in sip tests and dazzle people and lead them towards making bad mixes. So I'm going to give you not only my top picks, but I'm going to throw shade and give you my picks for the most popular budget entry-level studio monitors that you should not buy, in my opinion. And I'm going to give you all the caveats on this because I realize that studio monitors, selecting them, just like selecting headphones, is a deep and personal choice. And what I like might not be what you like. So as much as possible, I'm going to give you these tasting notes to give you a sense for which monitors might be the best ones for you, even if you don't have the same taste as me. Are you ready to get into all that and more? Let's do it. The only thing I got to do before we get into my top picks or give you the briefest of shout outs to our sponsors. And the most important sponsor, as always, is you. How do you sponsor this podcast? Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, all that good stuff. But the best way to sponsor this podcast is sponsor yourself. Check out one of our great full-length courses like Mixing Breakthroughs, Mastering Demystified, Compression Breakthroughs, EQ Breakthroughs. They are guaranteed to change the way that you work forever for the better or your money back. Join us over at members.sonicscoop.com. Also, where you can become a member, and we have these regular mixed feedback sessions and Q&A sessions. And the mixed feedback sessions will give you the low-hanging fruit, the things that you need to change in your mix to improve in great detail. Compared to your favorite references, it is life-changing. Check us out over at members.sonicscoop.com. Also, big shout-out and thanks to Soundtoys. They're giving away something completely for free today. If you go over to soundtoys.com, you can get a free plugin right now at Soundtoys. Here, this is live. I'll type this in live. Soundtoys.com. They're giving away the Space Blender only until May 22nd. So act now to get this totally for free because it's not going to be free for very long. And also over at SonicScoop.com/contest, we are giving away right now a full ride to the music production certificate program at Point Blank Music School. This is worth $3,000, the online version of this program from those guys, and they're giving away one to our readers. Check it out, SonicScoop.com/contest. All right, with that out of the way, let's get into the top picks. And I'm going to just dive right in, tell you what my top choices are and what my bottom choices are. I've actually put this into 3 separate categories. So we've got the A tier. These are the speakers that I believe are the best all-around speakers. The speakers that, if there's just like one set I have to recommend that are going to be the top ones for just about everybody, I'll give you the short version of this right now. And I'll give you my top picks right here in the first few minutes. And then the rest of this podcast episode is going to be going into details about why my top picks are my top picks, why my bottom picks are my bottom picks, and why your order might be different than mine and which ones you might prefer instead of me. But if you want the quick version, here we are, 4 minutes and 23 seconds in this podcast. You want the full value of the give me the quick tips 6 minutes in, we will get that right now. No delay. Here they are. Top picks. A category. This is the best all-around monitors for $500 and under. Real quick, I wanted to put some brackets on this. We're looking at 5-inch woofers like this one. This is the last bit of preamble I promise I give you before I reveal all of my top picks at the 6-minute mark. But we are doing 5-inch speakers, just so I could compare them all. This is actually even nicer set. This one is out of budget right now for us. This is the Head Analog A-Core. It was just announced today. This is a 5-inch speaker, probably costs right around $700. It was literally just announced, so the pricing is being finalized today as we speak. So if I'm slightly off on that, let me know. But I'm going with speakers that are slightly less expensive than this one. Our cutoff for this series is $500 and below. Because when you're getting into $700 and up for a 5-inch driver speaker, and things change. So I'm looking at things that are $500 per pair and less. Just to give you some context, these Head A-Core, let me pull them up and I'll get you the exact price. For context, so you can see how high speakers go. You know what? Let's look also at the Atom, because their pricing is more established already. A series. Let's look at their A5V. These are about $600 for a 4-inch speaker. Their A4V. That's about $600 per speaker. So about $1,200 for a pair of speakers. Once you get into that range, you're in a totally different price bracket. And that's going to be similar for these new heads that are out. These are about $700 per speaker for a 5-inch speaker. However, the speakers we're going to be looking at today are more like $500 for a pair of speakers and below. So that's our big thing. And we're comparing as much as possible 5-inch drivers across the board so that we can have honest comparisons. But a lot of the models we're going to look at, they'll have smaller drivers, sometimes 3 and 4-inch drivers, and they'll often have larger drivers, sometimes 7 and 8-inch drivers. But for the basis of comparison, we're just looking at the 5s. Okay, here we are, as promised, at the 6-minute mark, and I'm going to give you my top picks, and then I'm going to give you the details. The A tier, the best all-around ones, I have a winner here and a runner-up. And my winner for the best all-around budget monitors, you want them? It is the Kali Audio LP6. These are $500 per pair. They're the most expensive set of monitors on this list. And the reason that they win is for neutrality. Then the runner-up in my A tier is the Atom T5s. These, I think, are the other best budget monitors, a little bit less expensive. You'll find them around $480 per pair. After this A tier idea, and these are the best all around that I think are going to serve the most people the best, I have my B tier. And my B tier are the best super budget monitors. These are the monitors that cost closer to $300. And I have 2 top picks for you there as well. So my B tier are going to be the PreSonus Eris Studio 5. These are $340 for a 5-inch driver, so considerably less. We're talking about $160 less than the top choice here, but also very good monitors. And even cheaper than this, the JBL 305P Mark II for only $300. I should have been bringing up images of these the whole time. So Kali Audio LP6, this is my top choice for you. The Atom Audio T5V, this is choice number 2. The PreSonus Eris Studio 5. Now we're getting into my B tier. This is choice number 3 on my list. And then the runner-up in our B tier, the JBL 305P Mark II. After that comes what I call the C tier. And the C tier are the hype machines. Now, the hype machines are the speakers that a lot of people buy them, a lot of people have them, but they do not have the flattest and most neutral response, and I don't think they're always going to lead you to the best sounding mixes or the best sounding productions. However, there may be valid reasons to choose these hype machine speakers instead of my favorites that I'm going to generally recommend to you. So my winner for the hype machine in the budget category is going to be the KRK Rokit 5 5th generation. And I'm going to recommend these above the classic, the KRK Rokit Classics, and I'll talk about why. And then my runner-up for the best hype machine, I had to include them on here, even though they are speakers that I hate. And I'm going to say it, I'm so sorry to throw shade. I hate the Yamaha HS5s, and I hate the way that mixes made on them turn out. But with that said, there are some people who are going to prefer these monitors, and I'll give you a sense of why they could be you, and I'll give you a sense for what are the problems to look for in mixes that come out of these monitors to see if you are having these specific problems, if changing your monitors to something else might help you. We'll also go into 2 final categories. So we've got our conventional monitors. You got my A tier, best all around. You got my B tier, best super budget. You got my C tier, which are the hype machines. Like, I can't really recommend these for mixing, but you might like them anyway. And here's what to watch out for, how they might mess you up, and why you might like them, even though they're not my top recommendation. But then there's two more categories that are important to consider. And one of them are going to be desktop monitors. And there's really three major choices here. One are the Adam Audio D3Vs that literally just came out. And these guys are super small. I have some of them right here. Here's an Adam D3V. Tiny, 3.5-inch driver, but there's these radiators on the side that make it go surprisingly deep for how small it is. I was shocked when I put these up against the Head and Adam monitors that are about $600 and $700 each. So we're talking about $1,200, $1,400 for a pair. These monitors, flipping between those and these, when I heard these next to them, the words that came out of my mouth, holy moly. I don't know why particularly holy moly, but that's what came out of my mouth involuntarily. I was like, wow, these are $350. And for some people, these are going to be the best bet. These even smaller monitors than we're looking at. And these are not the only options. There's also some options from IK Multimedia, and there's also some options from Kali. They make a speaker as well in this smaller form factor, although slightly larger than this one. And I'll give you my tasting notes in comparison on those. My personal recommendation is for the Adams, but I'll tell you why you might prefer the IK Multimedias or the Kalis for your personal tastes and needs. And last but not least on this list, I gotta throw it in there, are the Cube style monitors. And my apologies if you're hearing some high frequency tweeting in the background. I have a pair of lovebirds in the house. They came with the wife. They're extremely loud and noisy, and I usually have the door down the hall from my studio closed so people can't hear them, but the door is currently open. So if they're making it through my noise gate, that's what that weird squeaking is in the background. I'm in fact going to text my wife right now in real time on this live stream and say, hey babe, can you shut the door to the bird room? Hey babe, can you shut the door to the bird room? I should have put in a smiley face, but we're live streaming. We got to go fast. All right. The last category of speaker here is going to be the Cube style monitors. And for this particular roundup, I have chosen the ones that are not my personal favorites, but are very good. They're the Avantone MixCubes. And this is a totally different style of monitor. And we'll talk about why these might be the best budget monitors for you to get. My slight preference is personally for the Oratones, the Super Sound Cubes. I also like the Reftones. I also like these Avantones. I have a slight preference for the Oratones. I'll tell you why. But because of price, the all-included price on the Avantones with an amp built in is $500. And if you look at the Reftones or the Oratones and you buy an amp separately for them, it's more cumbersome, so it's not as beginner friendly. And we're really focusing this in as like budget speakers for entry-level monitors. And I think doing a separate speaker and amp is daunting for a lot of people who are just getting into mixing, music production, and pro audio. But these may be a better option for you than any of the speakers we've looked at so far, even though they are more limited in bandwidth. And for this particular series, I'm selecting the Avantone MixCubes because they come in right at $500 with an amp built in. So more affordable and more simple than the other options in this style, one of which I like slightly more. Again, if you want the article version of this, you get my full tasting notes in the time it took to talk this stuff at you. But in the remainder of this time, we are now 13 minutes in, and I've given you basically my full notes on this stuff. But there's more that I can say, which is how they really sound compared to one another, why you might like one more than another, and why your order might be different than mine. This is where my fine tasting notes come in. And let's get in now to the back half of this podcast. All right. Number one, Kali LP6. Why did I select these as my top in the budget monitors? And why above one of my other favorite brands, Adam? I've got to say, Kali Audio and Adam Audio are two of my favorite brands when it comes to speakers. At every price point that they make a speaker in, Kali and Adam are among the best choices. I will say, though, when you put Kali and Adam head-to-head at the same price point, Kali often offers a little bit more in ways of feature and performance for a little bit less money. However, when you have more money to spend, I think the comparable versions from Atom are often going to outperform comparable versions from Kali. So what the Kali LP6, I think, really competes with is not the lower priced Atom Audio T5V. Where it really competes is against the Atom Audio A5V. And the Atom Audio A5V, we just saw it a little bit earlier. I brought up prices here. Let's look at that again. Atom, their A4V, you even compete with that, $600 each speaker. So that's $1,200 for a pair of speakers. I would say that if you're willing to spend $1,200, I might rather have a pair of Atom A4Vs or Head, their new Type 5s, which are the 5-inch, which are going to be about $1,400. If I have $1,200 or $1,400 to spend, I am going to want those over the Kali LP6s. However, if I have below that amount of money to spend, the Kalis are practically in that class, not quite as good for a fraction of the price. So they are phenomenal at every price point. Once you start spending around $1,000 or $1,200 in monitors, in Kali, now you're looking at the top of their line, the IN8, which is now a 3-way monitor with an 8-inch driver, and that is comparably priced to smaller 2-way drivers from brands like Atom and Head. And although if money isn't an object, I prefer comparable models from Atom and Head over Kali personally. When you go look at the options from Kali at one price and the options from Atom or Head at that same price, Kali's just often offering even more neutral sound at that same price point. And that's why I think the Kali LP6s slightly outperform in neutrality the Atom T5Vs, which are $20 less. With that said, there are some reasons you may prefer the Atom T5Vs over the Kali LP6s. The reason why the Kali LP6s get my pick for the top budget monitor is because I think they lead you towards making good sounding mixes. Out of all the speakers we're going to look at today, they are hands down, bar none, the most neutral, the most flat frequency response, the most unbiased. Those are the pros. And the good thing about having relatively flat speakers is, yes, other people aren't listening on flat speakers. They're listening on a million different types of systems, all of which are skewed in their own unique ways. But when you take the average of every other wacky system that you're going to hear in the world, your car, which is too bassy, and your friend's car, which is too bright, and this laptop, which has no low end, and this other speaker set, which is nothing but low end, and you take the average of all of the weird speakers out in the world and the ways in which they can be weird, the average of all those speakers is flat. So if you can make your mix sound really good flat, it's more likely to sound good everywhere. And it's much easier to learn how to mix on a flat speaker than a skewed speaker. Because a speaker that has a lot of low end, your mixes are going to sound like the inverse of your speakers. So if you're mixing on a set of speakers with a ton of low end, you're going to have bass light mixes. So you're going to have to learn, because my speakers are really bass heavy, and I like having a lot of bass, I'm going to have to load an absurd amount of bass into it, more bass than even I would like to normally listen to. And that's when I know it sounds right. So you have to make those kinds of decisions when you're working on relatively skewed monitors. And out of the budget monitors we're looking at, Kali are the least skewed at $500 for a pair. After this, the Atom T5Vs, I want to say, are the second least skewed. And the way in which they are skewed from flat, from neutral, is one of the best and most useful ways that a set of speakers could be skewed. Remember that I told you your mixes are going to sound, on average, like the inverse of your speakers. Now, the Kalis are flat and neutral and kind of boring, which means that if you want your mixes to sound exciting, you're going to make your mixes sound exciting. And if things sound exciting on the Kalis, they're going to sound exciting everywhere. The way in which these Atoms are skewed is that they have a little bit of softening in the upper mid-range. This harsh area around 2K, 3K, 4K, somewhere around there in the upper mids. I'd have to look at a frequency chart to double check exactly where the slight softening is. There's this little bit of softening in this upper mid-range region that is harsh and fatiguing. So that makes these speakers sound kind of smooth and maybe a little bit on the dark side in a way. But they actually have a little bit of accent in the higher highs. So there's a little bit of a lift in those frequencies at 8K, 9K, 10K, and up. So in that balance between the upper mids and the highs, they soften the upper mids a little bit, and they bring the higher highs into more focus. And they do it in a very unfatiguing way because of the ribbon drivers that are in these atoms that really make high frequencies very unfatiguing, in my opinion. The good thing about this is that so many mixers don't push enough upper mids in their mixes. Because listening to lots of upper mids for extended periods of time, you're working on a mix for 4 hours, for 8 hours. By the time you're done with that mix, you're getting fatigued, you're getting tired, you're not pushing as much upper mid range as you should. By default, most sounds are a little bit dull compared to where they want to wind up on a finished record. So a lot of the mixing that we do when it comes to EQ is often around cutting low mids and boosting upper mids and giving things more presence and making them more assertive, making them come alive a little bit more. So the average beginner and intermediate mixes sound a little bit dull, a little bit mid-rangey, a little bit boxy, a little bit veiled. This is exacerbated by the fact that so many beginning and intermediate mixers mix on things like the KRK Rokits, or worse yet, the Yamaha H5Ss, which we'll get to soon, which sound extremely bright and assertive. And that makes their mixes sound even more dull because they're mixing on these really bright, tight-sounding speakers, and their mixes sound even more dull still. But even if you're mixing on relatively neutral-sounding speakers, until you get good at mixing, you're going to tend to have mixes that are maybe a little bit on the duller side, which is okay. Worse yet is when people mix on like the Yamaha H5Ss, which have a lot of upper mid-range and then less extreme high frequency, they have this super annoying thing where their mixes have like no upper mid-range, they have no excitement, no detail, no clarity, but inexplicably, they have this annoying super high frequency stuff, tons of extra sibilance on the voice, tons of extra splashiness in cymbals, tons of extra reverb, high end on reverb that they don't need because they're mixing on speakers that have exaggerated upper mids and then softened high highs. The Atom audios have exactly the opposite of that. Slightly softened upper mids, encouraging you to get rid of boxiness in the low mids, encouraging you to bring a little bit more presence and detail into your mix. And because of the slightly elevated higher highs, they're keeping you from having overly sibilant mixes with overly bright cymbals and overly splashy reverbs. So even though the Atom T5Es are slightly less neutral than the Kali Audio LP6s, I think they're more likely to lead you in the right direction than any of the other skewed monitors that we're going to look at on this list. So these are my two favorites. If you want a monitor, really neutral, slightly boring sounding, but will get you great results, that's the LP6. If you want a monitor that's slightly colored, but colored in a great way that will lead you to make great mixing choices, that will be the Atom T5V. And the other benefit with the Atom T5V is that because of this softening in the upper mids and this little bit of extra detail in the higher highs, they just sound a little bit more fun to listen to. They sound a little bit more interesting. They have a little bit more of a personality in a good way. They have this smooth but clear sound, which is nice. So if you want a speaker that sounds nice, but that won't make your mixes sound not nice because they're leading in the wrong direction, Atom T5Es. And these are my top two picks. Everything else is a compromise below that. With the exception of maybe our last category, which is going to be the desktop speakers and the MixCubes. Some of those are very good, but we'll get to them. All right, super budget. If you want a full-sized monitor that's less expensive than either of these, by about $150, $160, that is the PreSonus Eris Studio 5. And I was skeptical of this. PreSonus, they're not a monitor company. They make inexpensive interfaces. And they do Studio One. I'm going to trust them for a pair of speakers, but they're actually pretty good. And in addition to making this 5-inch, they also make some full-size ones that are even smaller. I think a 4.5-inch, a 4-inch, and a 3-inch. So really small monitors, all of them really affordable. And the PreSonus Eris Studio 5, this is a bit of a sleeper. You don't hear about them as much as the other two monitors I talked about, but these ones are ever so slightly skewed. But the way in which they are skewed, again, is somewhat useful. And the way that these guys are skewed is they're a little bit heftier and warmer in the lower mids. They've got this little bit of extra girth, somewhere between, I'm going to guess, 300 to 500 hertz, right around there. There's this extra bit of fullness and fatness in the PreSonus Eris Studio 5. And this, again, is a relatively good way to be skewed if you're going to be skewed. Because what do most beginner and intermediate mixes sound like? They usually sound a little bit murky and muddy in the lower mids, a little bit veiled on top. And these monitors are going to encourage you to brighten things up, scoop things a little bit more, add a little bit more detail and clarity in a way that's going to work for most popular styles of music very well. So these, again, could be good monitors for you. Frequency response stuff aside, I do trust the transient response, low frequency resonance, and low frequency extension more on the Atoms and the Callies than anything else that we're going to get to. But these are still reasonably good when it comes to low end for this size speaker. And pretty much all of these guys also have larger and smaller drivers as well at different price points. Also, a quick reminder here that if you want to support this channel, no additional cost to you, we got affiliate links throughout this article and in the description, and I'll put them in the comments down below. And if you click one of the affiliate links to buy speakers or anything else, it really does help support the channel, no additional cost to you. All right, my runner-up for the best super budget pair, these are even less expensive. For a 5-inch, the JBL 305P Mark II. And these are only $300. And I've got to say, they compare favorably to the others. If you want monitors that are slightly more scooped sounding, slightly more hype, slightly more of a smiley face, that emphasize the lows and the highs a little bit more and flatter your audio a little bit more, but don't do it so much and too much that they're going to drive you in the wrong direction, then these would be my other recommendation for a super budget, full-sized pair, the JBL P series, I guess they would be, Mark II. Not quite the low mid girth that you'll find on the PreSonus, but if you want a little bit of smiley face, if your biggest problem is not mixes that are too dark, but sometimes you overhype things a little bit too much, and you want speakers that give you a little bit of hype so you don't overhype your sounds too much, the JBLs could actually be a better choice for you. And maybe if that's your big problem, is that you overhype too much and you want inexpensive monitors, and you want monitors that are a little bit more smiley, a little bit more hyped without being overboard hyped. You mixed on the Cali LP6s and you're boosting way too much lows and upper mids and highs and putting way too much smiling things, and you want speakers that rein you in a little bit. These guys will do that without overdoing it to the degree of the speakers in our C tier. So these are still a great choice in what would be my B tier. But depending on your own personal biases and issues, these could even be your preferred monitors. Just because they're B2 on my list doesn't mean they can't be A1 or A2 on yours. All right, next one. Ready to keep going with me? Here we get into the speakers that, at least one of these, I kind of hate. And the others, I don't hate as much. But I also get why people like them, and we got to discuss that, and maybe you'll like them too. So, here they are. The KRK Rokit 5's G5, Generation 5. These speakers are relatively inexpensive. Oh my goodness, I didn't put the price in here for these. I believe both of these are either, I think they're both like 400. I'm sorry, guys. I'm going to have to go to one of my websites here and just double check real quick. We'll go over to Alta Music. Let's see if they have any Rokit G5s in stock. And that's the G7. G5, yeah, they're about $400 for a pair. I believe both of these, the Yamaha HS5s and the Rokit 5s, are both about $400 for a pair if we're looking at the 5-inch drivers. Now, the original Rokits, which they actually reissued as the Rokit Classics, are super scooped. They are like smiley face to end all smiley faces. They are ridiculous V-shaped, U-shaped sounding monitors. And I remember these coming out and being popular in the early 2000s when I was first, getting into professionally being in audio, and people who got them loved them. They're like, oh, they sound so good. Studio monitors aren't supposed to sound so good. They're not supposed to hype you up on your tracks. They're supposed to make you hype up your tracks. And if the speakers are already hyped up, you ain't gonna hype up your tracks because they already sound all hyphy. You should be on a hyphy mission, man. And I gotta tell you, speakers like these, or at least the original classic KRK Rokits, they would tell you that hyphy mission was already accomplished. Like they'd have you touching down on the aircraft carrier with a giant hyphy mission accomplished sign, when in reality, there was so much more hyphying yet to be done in the mix. Don't let this happen to you. But KRK took that criticism from the people who were using these monitors. They were extremely popular when they came out. And they said, in future generations, we're going to make them a bit more neutral. And I've got to tell you, the Rokit 5 G5s are their most neutral monitors yet, and their most flexible monitors yet, because the whole back panel has a few different digital EQ options on it that can actually boost the mids and make them even flatter potentially. And you can also get the super scooped response if you want to hype up your clients in the studio. So they have this additional flexibility with some of these preset EQs that are in them, but just the natural neutral flat voicing that's in them is their most neutral voicing yet. And it's again a voicing that's a little bit more bright, a little bit more exciting, a little bit more detailed than most of the other monitors that we've looked at. But with the G5, they're going to lead you astray the least. So if you want something that really hypes you up more than anything we've talked about, but isn't going to be as detrimental to your sound and your choices in the mix, I've got to say the KRK G5 is the best option that they've made. And if you're looking for super hype in your speakers without being led totally astray, that's my recommendation for you. And now we come to possibly the most popular monitors on this list that just make me want to facepalm that they're so popular. These are like the Sony MDR 7506s of monitors. If you don't know what that means, the Sony MDR 7506s were these extremely popular headphones in the, I guess they started in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s. And to me, they just always sound so bright, so brash, so annoying. I've said this so many times on this channel. And if you want to mix in those headphones, you've got to make your mix really bright, really brash, really annoying. And when it sounds bright and brash and annoying, you know your mix sounds right because that's what the headphones sound like. If those headphones could be speakers, they would be the Yamaha HS5s. Ubiquitous, and in my opinion, terrible. Terribly voiced. That said, you and me are not the same person, and these speakers could be ideal for you. And my personal tastes, my personal subjective tastes, are not the be-all, end-all. So I have to throw that caveat in there. But I will tell you the possible problem with these speakers that you might have run into if you use them. I've had so many people who I've done mastering sessions for or mix coaching sessions for who have mixed on these speakers. And even before they tell me they mix on these speakers, I'll ask them, did you mix this on the Yamaha H5S series? Was it the H5S or the HS5? I think it's called H5S. Did you mix them on the Yamaha H series of speakers? And they'd be like, yeah, how'd you know? It's like, because they sound like all of the mixes I get through the Yamaha H speakers. These speakers are so bright and tight and present and assertive in the upper mid-range, especially, I think it's probably around 2 or 3K. Again, have to double check a frequency response chart, but that the mixes come back as the opposite of that. Because the low end is kind of hyped up a little bit here, and then the upper mids are kind of hyped up here, but then we have this softened extreme top end, your mixes sound like the opposite of that. So what's the opposite of that? That means your lows are unhyped and not big enough. And one of the reasons you got these monitors is because you wanted your lows to be hyped up. So you got monitors that hyped up the lows a little bit. But you also want really bright monitors because you like really bright sounds. And the problem is because your monitors are really bright, your mix isn't. So what does the opposite of this sound like? It sounds like a mix with weak, indistinct, muddy, woolly bottom end, a muddy, murky lower mid-range because they didn't tell you to cut in that area, and then a really indistinct, undefined, undetailed, unarticulate upper mid-range where it just sounds dull and lifeless and flat. But then because the high frequencies are reduced relative to the upper mid-range, you end up boosting a bunch of highs. So you have this weird extra sibilance and cymbal wash and extra reverb sizzle that you don't need in there. That's like the worst possible thing for your mix. That's like almost the worst tonal profile you can have in a mix. How was the mix? Oh, it was pretty good, except the low end was really weak. The low mids were really muddy. The upper mid-range, like I couldn't hear any detail or separation between instruments. And the high frequencies were exaggerated and cloying and overly sibilant and harsh and bright. Like what else could possibly go wrong in your mix than all four of those things? You got like every single area wrong in the mix. And that's what mixes on the Yamaha H5S sound like. And that's why I hate the Yamaha H5S monitors. Hashtag shade thrown. Now, with all that said, some people may mix better on these monitors. If you're the rare kind of person where your mixes are way too bright, way too harsh, way too thin, and you're just mixing too bright all the time because you want to hear a lot of excessive brightness, then these monitors could be for you. Because but this is the rarest problem that intermediate and beginning mixers and even advanced mixers have, is the rarest problem to have overly tinny, overly thin mixes. But if that is your problem, these monitors could help take you away from that by sounding bright to begin with. I've heard people talk about these monitors and how they like them because of how detailed they sound and all the separation between instruments they can hear, which is really just a big boost in the upper mid-range. And the problem is your mix sounds like exactly the opposite of that. And the thing you really like while you're listening to your speakers is everything that you don't end up doing in your mix, because your mix, generally speaking, ends up sounding like the inverse of your monitors. So beware, whenever you like the sound of your monitors too much, remember that your mixes will sound like the opposite of that. Fortunately, with flat monitors, the opposite of flat is flat. Or sometimes you could say the opposite of boring and neutral is a little more hyped up, which is maybe what we want. So that's generally speaking one of the reasons that flatter monitors are a better way to go. All right, we're just about to the end here, 36 minutes in. I don't know if I'm going to be able to go through the live chat too much today. If there's any people who really want to get your chat read here on the air, do it as a super chat, because I don't want this to take forever. But Feudal Recordings writes in to say, my mixes sucked on the HS8s. I thought it was just my mixing skills, as all these producers were using them, sold them, got the IN8s, life-changing. I 100% believe that. The IN8s are absolutely great speakers. They're not in this list because they're above the price point I was looking for. I think those would be closer to $1,000, but those are wonderful. Let's go real quick through the other categories. And these other categories I'm going to spend less time on because I think each of them deserves a video all of its own. And these last two categories are desktop monitors. And we got three big options here. My pick, maybe it's just because I'm fresh, maybe because they just came out and I've just been trying them and loving them. Maybe it's because I'm an Atom fanboy, and I have been for years, and I like their voicing, and I like monitors that skew a little bit dark, that encourage me to mix a little bit brighter. Maybe it's because they are better, but these are my top pick, but there's two other great picks in this area. And I've got to say, I'm almost wondering, after hearing these, how 3-inch driver full-size monitors, like the smaller PreSonus Erises and the smallest Atoms, if there's like a 3-inch Atom, not like these, like how those types of monitors are going to stay relevant when desktop monitors have gotten so good with some of the ingenious things they're doing with porting. So let me pick up these here. Really small monitor. So much cool technology packed into this with these resonators on either side that allow it to go super deep, relatively resonance-free for a package this small. Ridiculous low frequency extension for the size it is, but they're not the only ones. Also in this series, let me bring up the other two, would be the iLoud micro monitors. And the iLoud micros are really nice as well. They're also 350. And the difference between them, I would say that the micros, they feel to me a little bit more scooped, where the Atoms sound a little bit more warm and smooth and thicker in the mid-range. So again, it depends on what you want to hear. I actually saw a guy who did a review of these, and it wasn't even a review, it was just him ranting for 17 minutes about how he doesn't like the voicing of the Atoms, and he likes his micro monitors better. I actually went up and looked up that guy's work, and it was hard to find because he didn't have any credits on any of like the major credit sites, so there was like no major releases he worked on. But I found a song of his that he had shared on his channel, and it was competently produced and mixed, decent. But what I found in his mix is his mix was actually a little bit thick in the lower mids compared to the top, biggest, most awesome sounding records in the style that he's working in. Like I pull up like some Audio Slave record, and, some of the best stuff, mixed by Brendan O'Brien, and all of them were like a little bit tighter in the lower mids. And I think his problem is he likes the sound of the iLouds because they are a little bit tighter in the lower mids, so his mixes don't sound tighter in the lower mids. And then he was listening to these Atoms, he's like, oh, things don't sound as good because they don't sound as tight in the low mids. It's like, right, that's the point. You want your mixes to sound tighter in the low mids, so mix on these, and then your mixes will sound tighter in the low mids. So generally speaking, if you're competing between the IK Multimedia iLouds and the Atoms, both the same price, same size. I would say that these Atoms are just a little bit fuller, fatter, smoother, thicker in the low mids, and the iLouds are just a tiny bit more scooped and hyped, but very slightly, and slightly tighter sounding in a way. And either of those could be better for you. So if you're overhyping your mixes and you're scooping things too much, the voicing of the IKs might be a little bit better for you. But if, like the larger majority of people, your mixes are maybe a little bit darker and more veiled, and you need to be encouraged to brighten them up and tighten them up a little bit more, the Atom audios could be a little bit more for you. This really comes down to personal taste. And then the other big one here, let me see if I can pull it up on another retailer. Here's Alto Music again. Let's look at the Cali LP UNHs. And they just have the LP. Here they are. This is a pre-owned pair. Oh, interesting. Actually, I think the Cali UNHs might be more expensive because it looks like maybe these are used for $350. Let me double check this. We're doing some sleuthing on the fly. Cali LP UNH. No, I'm seeing them $350. I misread that. Here is a B&H. Yeah, $350. I guess I misread that. So these are really nice too. Really good voicing. They go very nice and deep for a speaker this size. Really small desktop speakers. They are a little bit larger though. They have a 4.5-inch driver for $350. And if you're going to buy a set of speakers for $350 and you want them really small and compact, the Calis could be a great way to go as well. I think they have very good performance, but they are a larger package. The Atoms are like remarkably small, and so are the iLouds. And the Calis, I think, perform as well as either of them. And some people might like them even better. Maybe, but I have to do more comparisons. Maybe they have a little bit deeper, more kind of resonance-free low-frequency extension. Maybe like the lows are a little bit faster because of the larger size of the driver, and it's not just porting shenanigans, but I don't know if that's true, and I really need to do more back-to-back critical listening comparisons between all three of these before I really figure out how the Calis stack up next to the Atoms for me. But so far, I think these are my favorite of the three. I think they're very ingenious. They're the latest to come out, and maybe that's why I think they have the best performance. But the iLouds and the Calis are also surprisingly good for this size. If you need really, really small speakers, these are a great way to go. All right, now I've got to give you one more thing. One more tier here, and this is the cube style of monitors. And I got to give you my pitch for these. I've got cube style monitors coming out the wazoo here. I have original Oratones. Let me see if I can pull up my full view right here over my shoulder. That shoulder, right under my platinum record. There we go. There they are. You can see them. Those are original 1970s, late 70s, early 80s. I forget. The owner of the Oratone company looked up the serial number for me and told me, forget what year, they might be 81 or something. And I love those. And I worked so much on those. And I also have tried the Reftones. I have some Reftones here, and I did a whole video on them. Also great cube style monitors. And there's also the Avantones. All three of those are wonderful options. Now, here's the thing about this style of monitor. The cube style monitors are not full bandwidth. They're going to roll off below 100 hertz, and in some cases below 200 hertz and even 300 hertz. They're not going to have low frequency extension deep down. They're also not going to have extreme high frequency reproduction. They might roll off above 10K or maybe even lower than that. That sounds terrible, Justin. Why are these like the most expensive monitors on the list, if all of that is true? Well, here's the deal. The single speaker and the closed box gives them really good transient response, really good phase coherence. There's not as much phase smearing between a woofer and a tweeter. They don't have this kind of hole in the middle issue that a lot of the two-way speakers we've been looking at can have. A lot of these two-way speakers where you just have a woofer and a tweeter, they kind of suffer a little bit in the mid-range and can have a slight feeling of a scoopy hole somewhere in the center, depending on the size of the woofer. The one way to get around that is to go up to a three-way speaker that has a woofer, a mid-range driver, and a tweeter, like this Atom Audio A77 over my shoulder. One of those speakers does lows, one of them does mids, one of them does high frequencies. So you have a dedicated 5-inch mid-range speaker giving you really good detail in the mid-range. And the mid-range is the most important thing to get right in your record. If you get the mid-range right and your low end or your high end is a little bit too much or a little bit too little, a mastering engineer can help with that. But if you've got all this boom and sizzle happening in the bottom and the top, and the mid-range of the record is a mess, your whole record is a mess. So the mid-range is the most important thing to get right. And these really help you focus in on the mid-range in a way that is even more accurate than most good quality headphones and most good quality budget two-way monitors. So they give you the clearest lens, the best lens into the mid-range possible, and they're relatively fast with relatively accurate transient response and a relative reduction in phase smearing and lack of phase coherence between lower and higher frequencies. And then there's also this aspect where the lows that are there and the low mids that are there are more likely to be more resonance-free than on a ported design that's trying to go really deep. And the other big factor that I haven't talked about here is that all these $300 and $400 and $500 monitors we've looked at, they could be good for you. And to be honest, I would rather have a $300 set of speakers in a room with $2,000 worth of acoustic treatment than to be in a room with $2,000 monitors and $300 of acoustic treatment. Let me say that again. I would rather be in a room with cheap monitors that's really well treated than in a room with really expensive, nice monitors that's terribly treated. The example I often like to give is, what would you rather have? A pair of Oratones in a super fancy studio, that's the way that Michael Jackson's Thriller was mixed, or would you rather have a $40,000 set of speakers in the middle of a gymnasium, like on a basketball court? Which is going to give you the better mix? It's going to be the inexpensive monitors in the better treated room. But I know most of you who are buying $300 monitors aren't going to be like, I'm going to make the smart choice. I have a $2,500 budget, and instead of spending $2,000 on speakers and $500 on acoustic treatment, I'm going to spend $500 on speakers and $2,000 on acoustic treatment. And that's honestly why I'd recommend that you do. But I know that you're not going to do that. Like, I know that everyone who's looking at $300 and $500 speakers is not going to spend $1,000 and $2,000 on absorption for their room, for starters. And, treating a room could go up from there potentially. So I know that you're not going to do that. So I know that you're probably going to be in a room where maybe you'll have a few $100s worth of acoustic treatment on your walls, maybe. And in that case, you actually might be better off with a set of limited bandwidth speakers like these. Because here's the thing. If you're mixing on speakers that take the low frequencies out of the equation, the hardest part to get right in your room is the lows. The most skewed thing in your room is the lows and the extreme lows. And if you just take those out of the equation on your speakers, you're not going to make as many mistakes in the lows because you're not being misled by lies in the low end. And you might just have to, for your extreme lows, making good choices about your subs, get a pair of really good headphones. So you could spend $500 on some Cube monitors, $400 or $500 on some really good headphones that will reveal a lot about the stuff below 100 hertz, and maybe $400 or $500 in acoustic treatment. There, you spent $1,500. You've spent $500 just on speakers that tell you about the mid-range really well, and that Thriller were mixed on, right? You also have a pair of $500 speakers, and I have a whole, or $500 headphones, and I have a whole list of the best headphones for $400 and under that you can check out. And there's some really good ones these days, $300 and $400 that you can make real good choice about and actually do most of your mixing in headphones these days, with your backup being these MixCubes. And then you could spend another $300 or $400 or $500 on acoustic treatment, whether you're doing DIY stuff and getting more mileage, or if you're lazy and don't know how to throw around a hammer like me, getting prefab stuff. And that would probably be a much better way to spend $1,500 on monitoring than to buy a $1,500 set of speakers and put them in your untreated bedroom. So those are things I want you to think about when you're thinking about your monitoring and why you might buy budget monitors for around $500. One is to free up other budget for other things. And when you think about your monitoring, don't just think about your speakers. Think about your speakers, plus your room, plus possibly EQ correction for your speakers and room. And those whole three things are an ecosystem. But I would add a fourth dimension to that in this day and age, and that is headphones, good quality headphones that can tell you the truth about what's happening in your lows, because you're more likely to get that at a lower price point today in headphones, then in speakers, and then ever before. All right, well, that's it for today's episode of the SonicScoop podcast. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. It's been Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. If you've enjoyed this and you've been able to hear me talk about monitoring for 50 minutes at this point, who better to learn about audio stuff from than yours truly? You can check out some of our great full-length courses, such as Mixing Breakthroughs, Mastering Demystified, Compression Breakthroughs, EQ Breakthroughs. They are guaranteed to change the way that you mix forever for the better. Guaranteed, or your money back. I've gotten countless testimonials on these. They really do change lives and change the way that people work forever for the better. So I will shill for them till the end of my days because I really know that they help people. And when I get emails about how much they've helped people, it puts a smile on my face, and hopefully someday you'll be one of those emails. If you want to get personalized feedback from me on your mixes, platinum mastering engineer over here who's been coaching people for years upon years, check it out over at members.sonicscoop.com. That's members.sonicscoop.com. You've got not just me, but a great community of people in there. We do regular mix feedback sessions and a whole lot more fun stuff. Also, big shout out and thanks to Sound Toys for making some of my favorite creative mixing effects in the known universe. Try out anything they make for free for 30 days over at soundtoys.com. And for a limited time, get their Space Blender plugin, totally new plugin, completely for free. We are also giving away over at sonicscoop.com/contest a full ride to the Music Production Certificate Program from Point Blank Music School. If you want to learn the fundamentals of audio inside and out, that certificate program is worth about $3,000, and we are giving away that full program totally for free. They are an accredited music production institution of higher learning that offers, I think, associates and bachelors and all that stuff, as well as their certificate program. So the certificate program is a 3-month program that is a crash course in teaching you everything that you need to know about getting started and really understanding audio at a high level. So check those guys out. And also check us out at sonicscoop.com. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. This has been Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. I'm going to read through your chats now for all those of you who are here live and respond where I can. Thanks again for hanging out with me. I'll see you next time.